Have you seen images like these? Perhaps at your workplace or on some medical poster somewhere. Incorrect and allegedly correct way of picking stuff up off the floor so that you don't hurt your back. You may have also heard the corresponding phrases, lift with your legs, not with your back. What does it actually mean? Well, in reality, it doesn't mean anything because people you're going to find using those phrases simply show lack of understanding of anatomy and lifting biomechanics. So why don't we cover that today? I've already dived down into the issue of back pain in detail, but when it comes to acute back injuries and tweaks, they don't occur in the gym for the most part, but during our daily activities, when we usually pay much less attention to how we position our body. Picking things up incorrectly on a day-to-day basis is in fact responsible for a very large number of back injuries, and this could easily be avoided. So I think it's one of the most practical subjects for a physio to cover. So let's explain and show how to pick things up correctly and how not to do it by analyzing the actual spine anatomy and biomechanics. And we're also going to talk about the deadlift a little bit since it's quite relevant to the topic. So let's first analyze the techniques from the image. This is the lifting with the back technique, and I guess you can see where the phrase comes from. You bend and round your spine to get down, and then you straighten it to come back up, while keeping the legs fairly straight. This is indeed incorrect if we're looking from the perspective of efficiency and back safety. The problem is that you change the alignment of your spine while lifting. The flexed position, although ineffective for lifting, isn't that much of a problem. It is the change of position. So your spine is flexed when you pick up the load, and then it extends as you lift. And that change in position while being loaded isn't something that our back is very well designed for. And we will talk some more about this in a minute. If you pick relatively heavy things on a regular basis that way, you may be setting yourself up for back injury or back pain in the long run. This is one of the incorrect ways of picking things off the floor. So now let's look at the other way, lifting with the legs. This is the supposed correct way that protects your back. The idea is to stay as upright as possible so that there's no flexion of the spine and so that it stays in neutral alignment, which is extension. But just look at the position here. To accomplish that, you have to shove your knees forward, which prevents you from getting close to the thing you're lifting, which in turn creates greater leverage. You also have to get on your toes to stay upright and remain in balance, which of course severely reduces your base of support while also putting a lot of extra stress on your knees. So simply put, this lifting technique is very inefficient and also not feasible. The moment you encounter some decently heavy object, you simply won't be able to pick it up that way. When looking strictly from the spine safety perspective though, it is actually a bit better than the first technique, however impractical. But I just don't understand why we should teach the less incorrect way of lifting instead of just showing the correct way. So which is it? Should you lift with your back or with your legs? Again, this is a stupid way of putting it because you need to use both. So here's the actual correct, safe way of picking things up. First, you're going to come really close to the thing you want to pick up. You're going to lean over it, balancing on the middle of your feet, and grab it. Before picking it up, you take a big breath and hold it, straightening out your back by thinking about pushing your belly down, and then lift by pushing your legs into the floor. Now, at a first glance, it may seem wrong because of the fact that you're leaned over, just like in the lifting with the back technique. But it's not, because the bend occurs at the hips. Here's a very important thing to note, and it is something that people who want you to lift with your legs don't understand. That this is a straight back, and this is also a straight back. Even though your torso is more horizontal rather than vertical because of the hip flexion, your spine is still in extension and remains that way as you extend your knees and hips. It therefore allows you to use your back effectively as a lever, while your leg muscles generate most of the force. So you use both your back and legs in a way they're supposed to be used. It is both the safest and most efficient. Now, anytime you want to pick something up, it's usually because you want to move it somewhere. And this is where most back injuries occur. Let's look at some proper and improper ways of moving stuff. Our spine is pretty good at tolerating compression. It is also actually pretty good at tolerating tension force, to which it is exposed the most when it's in flexion. But what it's not good at is tolerating tension and rotation at the same time. So here's how people hurt their backs. You pick something up, probably with somewhat bent spine, so it's already under tension, and then you rotate it. Think of a situation when you put something in the trunk of your car, for example. This is the number one scenario that hurts people's backs. It is rotating it while it's loaded. And here's a simple way of avoiding it. You're going to perform the rotation with your feet. Pick the thing up correctly, like we explained a minute ago, with straight back, keep it that way, and then move your feet to put the object in the desired spot. Wherever you want to move something, just remember not to rotate your back while it's loaded. Keep your back straight and change directions by moving your feet. That way, you're going to drastically reduce your risk of back tweaks and back injuries. Okay, but sometimes we encounter objects with awkward shape, which doesn't allow us to set up in the optimal position to lift them. And you're basically forced to set your back in flexion. Although maybe a bit extreme, a good example of that are atlas stones in strongman competition. So what do you do in that situation so that you don't hurt your back? I've mentioned before that spine flexion, even under a load, isn't that big of an issue. The problem is when you change the position of your spine under a load. So when you pick something up with flexed spine, that means at the end of the movement, you'll have to extend it. This is problematic, unless you just don't do it. If you have to pick something up with a flexed back, keep it flexed, and just extend your knees and hips. It may be a bit difficult, especially if you're used to lifting with straight back, but with some practice, it can be done. Again, use feet movement to move the object to where you want it to be, and only when you let it go, you extend your back. So basically, whatever position you have to put your back in to set up to lift an object, keep that position as you're picking it up. Don't change your back position while it's loaded. If it happens to be spinal flexion, so be it. As long as you don't change that position until you've released the load, it should still be perfectly safe for your back. All of this brings us to one of the fundamental strength exercises, the deadlift, which is a perfect representation of correct and efficient way of picking things up off the floor. In the proper deadlift, you stay very close to the bar throughout the entire lift, you keep your back in extension the entire time, while generating the force mostly by your legs and hips. So the deadlift is not only a great tool for strengthening your back, hips, and legs, and obviously the stronger your back, hips, and legs are, the less likely you are to hurt yourself, but it also allows you to learn and practice proper movement pattern, and that way there's an even higher chance that whenever you have to pick something up in your daily life, you'll do it correctly and safely. But knowing what we know now about spine mechanics, let's look at the deadlift and talk about 3 major mistakes by which you are actually more likely to hurt your back as opposed to strengthening it. Number 1 deadlift mistake, by which you'll probably injure your back, is bouncing the weight off the floor as opposed to resetting it and performing every rep from the dead stop. A dead lift starts from a dead stop. So not only bouncing it defeats the purpose of the exercise, it also pushes your back out of the extension at the bottom of the movement because of the ground reaction force. Instead of resetting your position and your spine back into extension, you immediately start picking the weight up again with flexed spine, which is now under tension, shear, and ground reaction force. Add the fact that bouncing the weight by that same ground reaction force helps you lift more, so you're probably using a heavier weight than you should. Bouncing the weight off the floor on the deadlift is the number 1 recipe for hurting your back. Number 2 is a very slow, controlled eccentric, so lowering the bar. The deadlift is concentric in nature. The bar should be lowered back to the ground in control, but rather quickly. If you intentionally lower it slowly, you're putting your spinal extensors, as well as other spinal structures, under a lot of unnecessary eccentric tension. This accomplishes nothing but fatiguing your spinal erectors, and more fatigued spinal erectors are more likely to fail under a load, resulting in back injury or back tweak. When you're finished at the top, just lower the bar quickly by first bending your hips and then your knees once the bar passes them. Try to stay unloaded as much as possible as you lower the bar. And number 3 is lifting with round back, so flexed spine. Now, in order to finish the deadlift, you have to stand up straight at the top. So if you lift with a rounded back, it'll have to come into extension. So again, we deal with that change of spine position under a load. But do note that it's only number 3 on the list, and a lot of you would probably expect it to be at the very top. We've all seen guys at the gym, probably every time, that put a lot of weight on the bar and deadlift it looking like an angry cat. And next day you see them again and they're fine. What I'm trying to say is that your back most probably won't explode the very minute you lift something with some degree of flexion. Don't take me wrong, you should still lift with your back straight to keep it safe. But if during some really heavy attempt your back goes into a slight flexion, and it doesn't happen very often, you'll still probably be fine. Now, it may be only number 3, but keep in mind that it's still on the list. Let's make it perfectly clear that if back safety is your primary concern, you should always strive to keep your spine neutral the entire time, and you should always avoid spinal flexion while deadlifting. So there you have it, folks, all the tips and tricks you need to avoid back injuries and keep yourself safe while lifting. Keep them in mind during your day, and eventually they'll become a habit and you won't have to think much about it. I hope you put these tips into good use and won't hurt your back ever again. And start training the deadlift if you haven't already to keep your back stronger, even safer, and pain-free. That's it for today. Remember to give the video a thumbs up if you found this information helpful, and to subscribe if you want to help the channel grow and help me reach more people. Stay strong, and until next time.